Chris and Ishihara. We're the Ishihara Parker law firm, and today we have a really exciting topic of what happens when our loved one needs more help, can't stay at home, needs that nursing home help. What happens, Kristen? What do we do?
I would say that just a pretty common scenario is we have children that come in, sometimes as a spouse, but today we're going to focus on just a single person. But they come in and their mom or dad has had a health crisis, maybe they had a stroke, maybe they fell and broke something, but they've been in the hospital. Then they discharge to a rehab facility, and we're having some rehab using Medicare days, maybe some supplemental days. But they've been made aware that the days will end at some point in time. Sometimes that's because they're not participating in rehab. Sometimes that's because they've just used their full time that they've been allotted for Medicare rehab. But at the end of the days, it really becomes a question of, okay, well, mom can discharge home, but if there's no one there for her, she probably cannot safely live there alone. Or certainly that's, sometimes the concern. Sometimes she can consider staying at the facility, but then that becomes, well, what's the daily rate there? So what would you have to privately pay at that facility to keep mom there?
So let me make sure I'm clear. Situations we normally see is sometimes people say, hey, come in and I'm concerned about mom or dad. They can't stay home, and here's the reasons why. The other ones we see often is basically I call it non-voluntary situation. Like, oh my gosh, mom had a UTI, mom had a slip and fall, we have a broken hip. They go to the hospital. The hospital says, listen, you're not ready to go home. You're going to need some of that rehab down at the local facility. They send you to the facility, and lo and behold, for whatever reason, they're not letting you go home, right?
Yeah, or you can't safely go home.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So the situation can come up sometimes at 20 days if what you have is an Advantage plan. If you have a traditional Medicare plus a supplemental policy, sometimes you can stretch that to 100 days of rehab there. But it's not uncommon if someone, just depending upon their health situation, is not able to participate in rehab, then Medicare no longer covers that. And you are instantly faced with kind of the situation of, okay, in Texas, you can pay the daily rate, which the average is $242 a day. That's over $5,000 a month. So privately paying just with cash that is available is always an option. Sometimes people have long-term care insurance. This would be a time when certainly if you had long-term care insurance, you should start utilizing it to help pay for the care that you needed. Nationally, only 11% of individuals have long-term care insurance. So while we see that, it's not the most common situation. Yep. And then last, we just want to provide some information on Medicaid, which is the only governmental program that helps pay for long-term care if your loved one needed to stay at a skilled nursing facility.
Yep. So if a loved one comes in, says, hey, I'm working on or helping mom or dad, we kind of start at the beginning, right? Before you can help your loved one, you have to have a document in place, right? You got to have those powers of attorney. If I'm in the nursing home and I can't get the documents needed for the attorneys to help, then my loved ones have to be able to do it as probably my power of attorney to go out to the banks, go to the life insurance companies, to gather the information, my proof of income, all the kind of documents the government needs. The government does provide benefits here that's more generous than most people understand, but there are a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of information to be gathered. So what do we gather?
Yeah, well, powers of attorney are certainly the place to start because otherwise you aren't able to get the bank statements that will be needed. You won't be able to get the income verifications that will be needed. But we just wanted to provide just here's what Medicaid requires if someone needed it. So number one, you do have to have medical necessity. So that means that you do have to have the need for some sort of medical care every day. That could be managing medicine. That could be, much greater than that. But you do have to meet the medical necessity requirement. You do, of course, have to be at a facility that accepts Medicaid, and specifically in a Medicaid bed. Medicaid is semi-private, so it will be a room that has a roommate. And not all facilities accept Medicaid, so that is a question for the facility, of course. You do also have to be in the facility for 30 continuous days of a stay. However, you can apply before the 30 days is up. Medicaid can date back 3 months, but you do have to be eligible based on their income and resource requirements, which is what Chris and I mainly deal with when we meet with clients, people that are either over income or over resource, and how do we best work within the parameters here to become eligible for Medicaid.
Yep. And when I see those problems come in, especially the first one I always see is an income problem, right? Someone come in, says, hey, mom makes, let's just say her paycheck, I look at her what's deposit in the bank and it's $2,700. And I say, well, let's talk about that means, because Medicaid's actually using gross numbers, not net. So mom's not actually at $2,700. She's probably at about $2,860, right? We're looking at withholdings and things like that. So they're going to always look at your gross number. So the first thing to remember is that there's a magic number of $2,742 for this year. If mom's gross income is greater than $2,742, then mom, by the rules of Medicaid, would be denied because she's over incomed.
But wait, she can't privately pay for care because it's over $5,000.
That's right. So are we stuck in a situation where mom's either having to find additional resources, looking at her children, or the solution in this case is to fix her income by doing what's called a Miller's Trust or a qualified income trust? And who does that? How do we do that, Kristen?
Why don't you talk about it?
All right. Miller's Trust or Qualified Income Trust is not a super complicated process. It allows anyone whose income is greater than that $2,700 limit to qualify for Texas Medicaid. The easiest way to do it, the way I usually do it, is I find the largest income source that if I removed it from the pool of income would leave the remaining income sources less than $2,742. So in this case, I take that Social Security check. It would be deposited like it always does into mom or dad's checking account, and then I would transfer it to a specialized trust account called a Qualified Income Trust or a Miller's Trust. Now that product, it's kind of a strange animal. It's a specialized document. You're going to have to come and visit the attorney, but we'd walk you through the process. The money, the income, we would deposit it into that checking account, that Miller's Trust, that Qualified Income Trust, and then from that trust, it would be paid to the facility as part of the co-payments, which are calculations that would have to be figured out. But basically, those documents and the proof of the use of the trust would have to be gathered and submitted to Medicaid because it will go to Medicaid legal review.
So does a qualified income trust allow me to save money?
It will not save you money. It will not save you on income, that is for sure. Income will be paid to the facility or potentially to the spouse, but it will not save you money.
That's a common misconception I think people have, that if they set up a Miller's Trust or a qualified income trust, it will save the money for them.
Yeah, no, the income, I'm afraid, is always in play. Income is always in play, but the Miller's Trust does allow, especially those people who maybe aren't bringing home $5,000 or $6,000 a month, but are over that $2,700. It really avoids them from getting squeezed. If your gross income is less than $2,700, right? If your gross income is below that, especially if it's significantly below that, I feel much safer. Then you can skip the Miller's Trust completely, and you would be qualified on income alone.
So what if I am helping my mom, she's at a rehab facility, and I talk to the business office manager, and she says, Mom has too much income to qualify for Medicaid?
Yep, you need to call us, and we can fix that. Really, when it comes to income, you can't be disqualified on income if you use a Miller's Trust. Now, if you come to me and say, Chris, we're making $10,000, I'm making $10,000 a month in monthly income, I might say, well, a Miller's Trust would fix your income problem, but maybe that's a situation where we just private pay. I don't know if I'd go through this process if I had the available income.
Sure.
That much available income. So you can never be over income. You could come to me and say, Chris, I make $1 million a month. I said, well, you're not over income to such a degree it can't be fixed. It just may not make practical sense.
Have a very high copayment.
Yeah, you very high copayment, which would defeat the purpose.
Yeah.
But so don't let anyone ever tell you that y'all make too much money. That is a solvable problem. They are right.
Yeah.
That is true. That is the test.
Right.
But I would say moderately easy to fix. Just be aware of it. Income must be fixed, and you have to fix it in the month you're applying.
Yes. That one cannot date back. Very good point. Very good point.
We've had people come in and say, oh, no, the facility just said we're over income. And I said, when did you apply? 3 months ago. I said, ooh, those 3 months are lost. You will have to private pay the $15,000 or so, but we can fix it moving forward.
Yeah, that's, I think, why it's a really, really smart idea to always get a professional opinion on it. A lot of times the facility will help you submit a Medicaid application, but at the end of the day, you are the responsible party for making sure it gets done. And so if something like that gets missed and you cannot backdate benefits, then there's a big old bill waiting for you from the facility who considers you responsible for it. And they're not, they've not given you official Medicaid advice. They've just helped you submit it and you remain responsible. So it is super important to make sure you know the rules and how your loved one falls within them. But income is solvable. I should never be denied Medicaid for being over income because I can solve it by getting the right advice and doing the right things. What about resources? So we're going to stick with single person today. But what is the resource limit for a single person?
Yeah, that is the easiest one. It is $2,000 in countable assets.
Yes, that's the easy part. The hard part is, what are countable assets? Yeah. So I usually like to use a hypothetical, so I'll use it today. Let's say that my father was in the nursing facility. He's a single 75-year-old individual. He's not really, but let's pretend. And he needs to stay past his Medicare days. Dad has a farm with 30 acres that he's lived on his whole life. He has one truck. He has an IRA that he had from working. So he has a qualified account that has $250,000 in it. He has prepaid funeral with the local funeral home, and he has $1,500 cash in his bank account. Would Dad be eligible for Medicaid?
Yeah, so let's go through it piece by piece. The biggest asset, the farm and 30 acres. So we know that Dad's home sits on that acres, so it's all attached. Assuming the value of the property is less than, what's this, your $700,000 for a homestead?
Let me peek at that. $688,000.
$688,000. So long as your home and touching property, right, is worth less than $688,000, that is not a barrier to applying for Texas Medicaid. It is an exempt asset, though we would do other steps to protect the home upon death. I'm going to throw that out there.
Yeah.
The truck your dad owns, a paid-for truck, was an exempt asset, one vehicle of unlimited value. Not saying to drive to the nursing home in a Bentley. I'm simply saying that a vehicle...
But
you could.
You could.
You could. One vehicle is exempt. The IRA, boy, that is a wonderful, wonderful rule we have right now in Texas. Dad is over age 73. This is a qualified account. Mm-hmm. It is a traditional IRA. That is an exempt asset of an unlimited value. In this case, the $250,000 would not count as a resource.
It was really quite shocking. So that change happened, just a policy, the way that the policy is reviewed here and applied in Texas, that changed, I would say, probably about 5 years ago. So had we had this conversation prior to that, the information would have been, you need to spend that down before Dad can be eligible. And now many, many people in the industry still are giving that information, which is wrong. Yep. A qualified account, which the way that we're using that term is you put funds in without being taxed. So you put it into a retirement account of some kind, 401, 403, IRA, qualified annuity, some sort of account that you put in without paying tax on it. When you turn 73 now, you have a required minimum distribution to pull some out and have taxable income. The principal of that account no longer is a countable asset in the state of Texas. The income coming out is going to be part of your income picture that we've talked about, and they'll average that out to be the between each month so that you have your required minimum distribution amount broken into those 12 months. It'll be part of your income picture. But the overall principal of the asset is exempt, just like your house, which is a really big deal.
Yep, that's right. And when you have beneficiaries on that account, when you pass away, it'll pass outside of probate, and your family would enjoy the fruits of your inheritance, which is really nice.
Yeah.
You stated prepaid burial. Your dad's taking care of business. Been
Very
down
smart.
to the local
Thank you,
funeral
Dad.
home. He's made his plans. We're going to make that irrevocable, and that would be an exempt asset. And the final thing Dad has, I think, was $1,500 in the bank. And of all the things we listed, that $1,500 counts on the Medicaid application. I have all these assets listed, but the only one they're going to hold against Dad is $1,500. And as so long as that $1,500 doesn't grow to $2,001 by the first, Dad would be qualified for Texas Medicaid.
Which is pretty crazy. Most people would assume that he's not. And what's great about that is that so many individuals would find themselves in the situation where their income is Social Security, maybe just Social Security and no other pension income. Mm-hmm. So if I have a $2,000 Social Security payment, well, paying the $5,000 skilled nursing bill is going to deplete my assets very quickly. And combine that with maybe I still have a home where I still have expenses there. That can be a really stressful situation for someone. So in Texas, Medicaid is a federal program but the state gets to decide and apply the rules in the way that they decide to. So in Texas, those things are protected. This would be different if you were in a different state, but in Texas, we value and help protect your home and your qualified accounts. But then, like Chris mentioned, we'll do a whole separate series on Medicaid estate recovery. So step one is the application time. And when you are looking at that, Medicaid does not prorate based on the month. So you're either eligible on the first of the month or you're not eligible for the month at all. So if dad were in that situation, I'd look at, this is the month of September, I'd look on the last date of September, I'd make sure his bank account was below $2,000 because that's his only countable asset, so I could apply for October 1st and ongoing. But they do take a snapshot of your assets on the first date of each month. That's how they check eligibility and how you maintain eligibility. But when you submit a Medicaid application, you are sending them all of this information. So you are fully providing 3 months worth of bank statements, 3 months worth of IRA statements, funeral plans, homestead information and tax appraised value, income verifications, all of those things are being submitted. So you really want to know before you submit whether the answer is going to be you're eligible or you're not eligible. What, Chris, what are some things that we see frequently that catch people that, in my example, I made dad eligible based on those assets, but what are some assets we should look out for that we see cause problems?
A couple things, assets that I always watch out for or situations that we see over and over. One of the biggest assets I like to keep an eye out for is life insurance. Term life insurance, not really an issue for us. Those usually have a zero cash value, and that's not a problem. Not what it pays upon death, but what is the cash surrender value. So a lot of times folks have used life insurances as a form of investment. They have built up value over time. There's a good chance that life insurance has a cash surrender value. Definitely got to look into that. You have to contact the company. You need the right paperwork to do that. You need to find out what the cash surrender value is. That one takes a little bit of time. There's a lot of legal departments involved. That is one that I always worry about just from a timing.
Can really slow you down.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you anticipate that with a loved one, I mean, get their bank statements and start looking at them so you know what those are. What happens a lot of times is we have a checklist that we'll send to the child who's maybe never been involved in mom's finances, and so they bring 3 months worth of bank statements, and we're sitting there, and I say, what is this American General Insurance? I have no idea. What is this Mutual of Omaha Life Insurance? I have no idea. So then they have to get a financial power of attorney if they don't already have one, start calling the company and getting information. But what is hard with that is if that policy's been in place for any period of time, the cash value is going to count, and it's probably going to be more than is allowed. So you'll either have to cash in the policy and spend it down, transfer ownership of the policy and take a penalty for doing so. But there does need to be a plan in place, and that one in particular takes time to get through just the process of getting the information, getting the action done. That can really slow you down.
Yep. I like to know about mineral interest and royalties just because that's another step that's both an asset and income for Medicaid purposes, always complicated, nice to know it in advance.
And can be identified on the bank statement.
Yep.
So mom has $130 that she deposited last month. Well, what's that? Well, it's mineral interest that she gets paid twice a year of almost no value. But guess what? Those sticky little things that you think, no big deal, don't care about it, that is what is going to hang up her Medicaid application and give you a really hard time.
Absolutely. And I've met so many wonderful folks, and they're thinking, hey, what we want to do is mom has acquired, or dad in this case, has acquired these things. Dad wants to keep his money. We want to keep his money, but to pay for dad, there are costs he's going to have: extra underwear, extra clothes, maybe a TV. Dad's just going to have costs, and he doesn't want to be a burden on the family.
Sure.
We don't want to waste it. And so oftentimes the kids will say, well, hey, Chris, we kind of knew the rules. So what we did in advance was we just took some of dad's stuff and gave it to ourselves.
Oops.
Yeah, see that a lot. We understand why. It's the right idea, but the wrong way to go about it, right?
Right.
Medicaid,
that happens all the time.
Very
Dad
common.
went to the facility and I went and pulled out $10,000. Well,
Hey.
guess what? That shows up on the bank account that you are sending to Medicaid.
Yeah. There's ways to handle that. There's ways to do it that are proper. There's ways to make gifts and associated penalties, I guess you say.
Yeah.
But none of it would be Medicaid fraud. You'd like to avoid that kind of thing. We want to tell them what we're doing, make sure we follow the rules. Medicaid does look back 5 years. They ask questions about what happened. And that's important to make sure you get those questions right. I've had Medicaid folks ask about caseworkers call, like, wait, what about that house they sold 2 years ago? Where did the proceeds go?
Right.
And then I go back and say, where did the proceeds go? And further conversations are warranted.
Good question. That's right. So it is, yes, you want to be fully honest and transparent so that you don't run into problems later. But the bank statements really are great places to get information. You need to know what any deposits are. You need to know what any withdrawals are of over $200. If it's made to an individual, by golly, you need to know what that is because it will be questioned. So a bank statement is a great place to start if you have someone in that situation where you anticipate maybe they may need long-term care. Because what is hard is if dad has a stroke, he goes to the facility, now we can't ask him questions. You're tracking this down in the dark. So it can be really tricky. So there's a couple of other things we want to mention that we won't fully talk about here, but teasers maybe. So one, what happens if I have too many accountable resources? What do I do, right? Dad's got $100,000 in his bank account.
Good problem, bad problem.
Yes, good problem, bad problem. So we'll probably address that in a future session. What to do with countable assets. Sometimes maybe you have 5 years that you could do something with. That'd be pre-planning. Sometimes you don't have 5 years. What are the options? We can address both. Then what is Medicaid estate recovery? Anyone that gets on Medicaid will have a Medicaid estate recovery claim. So you need to protect your assets both at time of application and at time of death. Very important. Very, very important. So we'll probably do some future informational sessions on those. So please stay tuned to those. This is information that we want you to have, but we really, really, really want you to get a professional opinion if you are applying any of this. This is not a DIY type of situation.
Texas Medicaid rules change. They change frequently. There's a lot of information out there. A lot of it is bad information. So we're giving you information to make you dangerous, but please understand, we want you to know that Medicaid actually is a very approachable, it's a very easy to get program if you follow the rules, but if you do not, there are consequences.
Right. It's like any governmental program. You can play within the rules to receive greater benefits than you would probably otherwise think that you were entitled to. It's just like filing your income taxes. Know the rules, do it the right way, and receive the greatest amount of benefits that you can. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We will plan some additional seminars in the future. Please feel free to drop in the comments anything that you'd like to hear us talk about that you're dealing with. We're glad to address it. See you next time.